Hi, it is. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. So, sourcing in a volatile world. I don't need to tell you that things are pretty volatile at the moment. I'll literally just tell you a little bit about who I am for those who don't know. I am one quarter of Retail 100 Consulting. We are a consulting company, four of us founded on 100 years of retail experience. I myself have 33 years experience at John Lewis, and the other three worked at John Lewis as well. Sarah Albright, who was here yesterday presenting, Elaine Hooper, and Neil, who is our guru of pivot tables and merchandising, something that is absolutely not my skill set. What we're going to do is just talk to you a little bit about sourcing and what is going on in the world at the minute. When I left John Lewis after 33 years, I did a course on strategy and leadership at the Oxford University and spent quite an amount of time talking about sourcing. So a little bit of what we're going to talk about is going to come from that. But one of the key things we worked about is sourcing in uncertain times means that you have to plan and have a different approach and a really agile approach, and things are incredibly difficult at the moment. So I'm not sure if you've heard of the term VUCA, but VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And clearly, this is the kind of times that we're in at the moment. And sourcing at the minute is really, really difficult. I still am in contact with my colleagues at John Lewis. And even a big company like that is hugely impacted by everything that is going on in sourcing. They tend to source most of what they have, either far shore or near shore. But the political impact of what is going on and social impact of what is going on across the world is having an impact on very many big companies as well as smaller companies. So it is pretty tough times. So you need to have a strategy. Again, pestle analysis. I don't want to throw lots of terms at you, but there's people laughing here. I don't know if you've heard of pestle analysis, have you? Oh, you have. There you go. I find this really fascinating. So pestle analysis, political, economic, social, technological, environmental and legal. And these are the things you really need to look into when you are sourcing, because they have a huge impact on what's happening, particularly the geopolitical impact. So what we're facing at the minute with Ukraine is one example to start with, and the impact that that has had on costs and sourcing in the world at the minute. And clearly, very, very currently, the conflict in Israel with Hamas means that the impact on Red Sea has had a direct impact for many people in their businesses. So freight costs have gone through the roof. They have doubled for some people, but not only have the costs gone up, there have been major delays in getting freight into the right place. So the Houthi rebels and the impact that they've had on the Red Sea has meant that directly freight has had to take different routes, which means that it's taking sometimes 2 and 3 weeks longer to get here. So if you're sourcing for your business, you need to have in mind that things are going to take longer to get there. So you need to factor in when you're going to need your goods and how you're going to get them, and also how you're going to pay for them. So real direct impact on what's happening in business at the moment. So in terms of that, when you think about the geopolitical impact, think about where you source. So this will always have a direct impact in business. The world is global now. And in the session I was talking about earlier, I was saying that one of the key things that's important in business is opening up free trade and actually lifting people out of poverty by free trade. But the dynamics of the world at the minute are making things incredibly difficult. So looking at the political factors, and you actually have to have, in your business, you have to have a world and geopolitical view if you're going to source. Think about the balance of where you source. So if you do far sourcing in somewhere like China, that is directly being impacted by freight. The freight is getting jammed up in Singapore, which is one of the biggest ports in the world. So all the freight's in the wrong place. So you can't get your containers when you want them at the price that you want your goods coming through in shipping. So just being mindful that having your eggs all in one basket isn't the way that you should trade in the future, if you ever did. And think about, can I tilt and be agile in my sourcing strategy to think about more near sourcing? So depending on your cost base, that will obviously have an impact on you. The other key thing to think about in terms of social is demographics. How is the country changing? So you might think that this seems awfully highbrow and it's not to do with you, but it has a direct impact on the kind of products that you're going to buy, The world is getting older, and the older people have more money generally, but what do they want to shop? Who are the demographics that I'm appealing to in my business, and what is the social impact and the demographic changes in the country? What impact does that have on what I sell? So if I'm aiming for Gen Z, I might be aiming at this price point. We know that Generation Z really, really want sustainable product. How do I factor that into my sourcing policy? So all of this pestle analysis impacts everything and every decision that you have. It's not something that's highbrow that doesn't actually impact on, as these guys clearly know, on how you source. So think about that. Think about the sustainability impact of what's happening in the world. So sustainability is an important strategy to have, but how do I make sure that my strategy is sustainable, and what cost implications does that have for my business? So again, as I was saying earlier, that doesn't mean you can't far source, but you need to do it in the most sustainable way possible, because the transparency that people want of where you source will have a critical impact on your business. And if your brand is about ethics and sustainability, you need to make sure that your sourcing strategy is supportive of that. So very clear, defining your sourcing objectives is going to define how you source. I'm not teaching you something you don't know, but very clearly you need to know what your product range is, what it means for you as your company, what's the quality of that range, what's the price architecture of that range, because you're sourcing at one low price point. Where does that impact where you source? That doesn't mean it isn't about quality, but how do I make profit out of that? So what are my cost targets? And your cost targets are impacted from when you decide what you're going to produce right to when you've sourced it and when you get it back into the country that you're going to sell it. So the very long sourcing chain is going to have an impact on the profit that you make for your business. So being very well aware right up from the start what every single cost in that chain is going to cost me, so that I know if I want to sell an item at £5, I'm going to have to source in a certain way. If I don't have the volume, I'm not going to probably be able to source in China. I'm going to have to think of different routes. If I want to source in the UK, my product is probably not going to be at that price point. It's going to be more mid to premium. And what's the impact of that for my business? So doing all of this analysis before you even think about it, the complexity of sourcing is critical in how you can make profit for your business. And then lead time is critical. How quickly do I need this product? How much time do I have? And if I'm sourcing something that's seasonal and it's Christmas, I need to have bought it by January, February in next year before it's going to come in October. If I want to repeat, where am I buying it for? So thinking about all the consequences of your sourcing strategy, where you're going to source and the impact that it's going to have on your business before you even go out and look. We did lots of scenario planning. I don't know if you guys who know about pestle analysis know about scenario planning, but many, many big businesses do a huge amount of planning in terms of working out what they should do and how they should source. When I worked at John Lewis, I was very famous for my quotes. I always like to wrap around a quote if I possibly can. And there's a very famous quote on planning which says, "Plans are worthless, but planning is everything." And that was by Dwight Eisenhower, who basically ran Second World War for the Americans. So the important thing about plans is that you have them, but also that they're agile. So you need to have a plan of what you need to do, but you need to have the ability in your planning to flex that plan. And that's what scenario planning is all about. So I picked up when I did my Oxford strategy course, I did Goldilocks planning. And this is very, very common. So we all know the story of Goldilocks. So basically, it's having a plan where you get just the right conditions. So it's thinking about your sourcing strategy and not having it so set that you can't flex it. So thinking about, in terms of sourcing, what is the right balance of risk and mitigation in my planning so that I can make profit? And the plan is only worth having if you can be agile about it. So basically, in a Goldilocks planning scenario, you will think about things of balancing the cost versus the quality of your product. So if cost is important to you and margin is important to you, which it has to be because you've got to make profit, you need to think very carefully about what your brand means to you and its brand positioning. Because if you go too low on cost and it affects the quality of your product, that's very damaging. So when I was at John Lewis, it was always really, really critical that the quality of the product was there. The company was known for quality, and we would not compromise on that. So having a sourcing strategy that produced the right product at the right price and the right quality for your customer was really, really critical. So if you're a big company like John Lewis, clearly you can go and source and buy volume. But I was telling a story earlier about working for a client recently who would buy MOQs, minimum order quantities, to hit a price. So they would buy 5,000 of this range, of a candle range, but they never ever sold more than 2,000 or 1,500 of one candle. So they walked into this range buying 5,000 to get an amazing upfront margin of 78%, but ended up selling. Their out margin for most of those candles was less than 20% because they never sold the quantities that they bought at full price. So thinking carefully, and Neil would be very proud, who works with me very closely, he's a merchandiser, think carefully about your exit strategy. What percentage of your product can you actually sell at full price? Because if you can only sell 50% at a full price, you're buying too much. We were also talking about the ethical point of actually over-sourcing and over-consuming, and the fact that we're over-producing goods, and that up to 40% of goods that are produced in factories to meet MOQs never hit the shop floor, and they're all written off or jobbed off, which is not good business and not good for the environment. So thinking very carefully in my strategy, what is the balance of the Goldilocks strategy? Where do I take risk? Where do I not? Also balance your supplier diversification, as we've said. So what's my balance of far shore and near shore? Where do I need things quickly? Where do I need to be able to repeat? If I need to be able to repeat in season, if I've gone to China, I need to be really quick with that. It's much easier to be able to repeat in season if I've gone nearer shore. So what you tend to find with the big companies, like the fashion companies who have to repeat quickly, is that they will, and home fashion companies now need to repeat quickly because people want newness much more frequently than before. So when I was head of buying for home, we noticed that there was a much greater drive to newness and freshness more than ever, that people don't want the same thing for years. And if you want to repeat in season, you need to think about where you're going to source, because if your lead time is 12 weeks, you're never going to get a repeat. And you're going to miss opportunities. So that's, again, managing the mitigation of risk. How much do I buy? How much am I prepared? How much do I need to sell to break even? And then everything else is profit. So managing the risk, managing it like a business is really, really critical. And then working with your suppliers. In terms of that, thinking about your lead times with your suppliers. If it is a long lead time, can I get them to hold additional for me? Will they work flexibly with me? And thinking about your inventory levels, because if you buy too much, for those of you who already know that if you have warehousing costs lots of money, and they will charge you by the facing, by the day, by the week. So overstocking is another real issue in terms of cutting into your profit. So balancing the risk of, I don't want to miss opportunities with, I'd quite like to sell out of some of this stuff, and if it's fashion, I let it go, but if it's core, I don't sell out of it, because I don't want to be paying a warehouse to store my product for me. So it's all of those links in the chain that you need to be aware of. And then I've talked about geographical diversity, thinking about the political things that are going on at the minute. Where do I source? How do I balance my near and far shore sourcing? And you have what's called a blended margin. So if your margin requirement is 65%, you don't get that from every supplier. You might get 65% in China, you might get 48% in Portugal, but you can blend the two margins and you have the ability to come back. And it's not about rate. And we always argue this in John Lewis, it's about driving cash. So you've got to drive cash because rate doesn't make you rich. Rate is important because it means you fix your cost to it, but you want to drive cash margin as well. So that was always a debate in John Lewis, where you're always being fixed on the margin rate, and we would argue actually you need to drive cash. If you were driving margin rate, you'd never stock Apple. It's got a margin of about 9%, but boy does it drive cash. So that just gives you an example of, so that's what you do in your sourcing strategy. You blend the margin rate and you blend your sourcing so you can make the most profit possible. So balance your risk, think about your cost benefits of that. So Goldilocks scenario, the benefit of a Goldilocks scenario is that you plan in your season knowing what you're planning to do. You've got cost efficiency, risk mitigation, operational efficiency, and adaptability. So really important that planning is part of your process. When you think about supply chain and logistics at the minute, that is an absolute nightmare. It's really difficult. You may have a plan and that may go out because you've got the Red Sea issues or you've got what's going on in China. And I think COVID taught us, it certainly taught us at John Lewis, because I was there when COVID hit, is that having too much of your eggs in one basket is not great. So when everything locked down, we couldn't get stock. So any of you who were trading in that time will understand it was really, really difficult to get inventory management. You either had too much that you needed to offset or get rid of because you had no trade and your shops were shut, or you couldn't get it. So we had categories like fashion where we were pushing lines out, which is really, really difficult. And we always made sure that we supported suppliers in that because we had long-term relationships. And yet you had other categories that I was managing, like cook and dine, which went through the roof. So everybody was at home, everybody was cooking. Even bread makers came back, which had literally been on eBay for years, but everybody decided to cook bread when we were all at home, and baking went crazy. So suddenly, having thought we were going to have to cancel a load of products because our shops were going to be shut and all of our sales moved online, we actually had to go out and drive more product sales on Cookshop and anyone who had office furniture, all of the categories that actually did really, really well out of COVID. The other critical thing we needed to do post-COVID was manage the fact that we weren't going to have a record cookware season the following year, so manage the inventory down. And businesses who didn't do that got caught out. One perfect example being Made.com with the furniture business, which bought too much product because it absolutely flew during COVID and then invested in product. Peloton did exactly the same. They thought we were all going to continue to exercise at home, and of course we didn't, so they ended up having 5 years worth of Peloton stock. So managing the fact that you know you're going to have bumps, and we always did very, very strategic reviews of what the season before had leveled, and if the weather had been incredibly hot and we'd sold a load of outdoor furniture that year, we knew the next year we were not going to be hitting those levels. So if you're going to have a record year one year, you need to manage the risk of what's going to happen the next year. So thinking about shipping and freight, thinking about logistics, it's really, really difficult factor at the minute with the costs. Freight doubled during COVID, so we were used to buying containers at $6,000 and they went up to $22,000 at the absolute peak, and about 12 and 14 on average. And I think that is happening at the minute. It's not so extreme, but a number of suppliers I've spoken to recently, clients of ours, have said that the cost of freight has gone up dramatically and the ability to get it in time has really, really pushed out because of the Red Sea impact. Think about if you have to air it in, if it's light, it's not a problem, but go by sea if you possibly can in terms of your costs. But thinking of the balance of, if I go by sea and I've missed all of those sales, sometimes it's better to take the hit up front and air it in. And if it's baubles at Christmas, which we often did, then we knew we needed to get them in time because getting them in January wasn't going to work. So clearly you make those decisions where you have to. We work with a really great company called Kalara, which is an Indian sourcing company. So for anyone who is new on their journey, Kalara are an amazing company. They're incredibly ethical and they're backed by the biggest company in India, a company called Reliance. And they are a sourcing company. You can access them online, and it's QALARA, and what they do is that they have lots of people on the ground, they have access to lots of factories, and they source in India and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and the Far East, but they also have boots on the ground for those of you who can't get out to factories. And because they have very close links with Maersk Shipping, they get preferential freight rates, and they can manage freight rates or sea rates or air rates for you, and they can also do a landed cost. So if you're really struggling with the fluctuations on prices, what they can do on their products is that they can do a landed cost, which means everything, duty, freight, is all included. So it allows you to know what your margins is. So really, really worth looking at in these really tough times, of someone who can help and partner with you to help you on that sourcing part. So customs and duties, I think you probably all know. So I'm really hoping that Donald Trump doesn't get in. I hope that doesn't offend anyone here. But Donald Trump has clearly said that he is going to really, really hit China with tariffs if he gets back in again. I think what the American people don't understand that is if he continues to do that, they will all pay more for their goods at home as well. I mean, he's very, very pro producing American goods. We absolutely get that, but he's really going to hit China and has in the past and has made no secret of that. Even Kamala Harris has said that tariffs will have to go up. So there is a definite shift in people sourcing from China to shifting possibly to India in America. And what we're seeing is some of the factories in China are moving to Vietnam to avoid tariffs. So be aware of what the world of tariffs is, and knowing what tariffs and what's free on trade is really, really important in terms of your business, because it's all a cost at the end of the day. So knowing about freight rates, knowing about tariffs, knowing where you're going to pay duties. Obviously, we've got free duty in Europe still. We've got Turkey, who've got amazing free trade agreements. Canada's coming. India is in the process of trying to get free trade. That is all going to have an impact on your bottom line. So being really informed as to where customs and duties are going to be, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be a cost to your business. So when we bought China in John Lewis, there's an anti-dumping duty for any of you who's in that category, and we hadn't factored enough of that in, and it was very, very heavy, the anti-dumping duty for China. So that's all a cost that has to go on to your product. So being well informed, and you can get lots of information from shows like this, but also from looking at government trade websites, which all will tell you the kind of free trade and tariffs that you can get. Egypt is another country that's really, really growing, because there's been huge investment from American companies to get vertical factories in Egypt, and they've got a free trade agreement, and they can produce amazing organic product. So you're seeing a real growth in countries like Africa and Egypt, really, really growing. So thinking about mitigation and thinking about risk, sometimes it's helpful to go and see some new countries and try with them and see, because what you might access is new products that nobody else has. And if you get in early, then you might build a relationship with a factory and get a good cost. So managing your sourcing strategy. And one of the key criticisms I had at John Lewis is we just inherited a supply base and tended to go with it. And actually what we did, we built a sourcing strategy in latter years to understand that actually you need to source and find new sources, otherwise you only ever get what you get. So managing your strategy by the core sources that you know to work with, but also working with new partners as well, can bring something new to your assortment. Hedging currency, again, you don't really want to be bankers, and at John Lewis this was excruciating, and I was in supplier management, which was all about hedging and looking at the cost of goods. So you can imagine we were spending millions and millions of pounds across the world. So we needed to know what we were paying. So we would hedge our currency very early. We would know what the pound to dollar was going to be. We would know, and always buy in the currency of the country because you get a better deal, but we'd know what the currency exchange rate was in this country, and we would hedge and we would fix. So at least if we fixed at what we felt was a good rate, it meant that we knew what our margin was going to be. Because what you don't want to do is have your prices fluctuating all over the place, and if the currency moves fast, it's going to have a really big impact on your bottom line. So understanding currency is really important. If you don't understand it, get some help. And again, we work with another really great company called Birchstone, which is a company that specializes in FX and currency. They're really friendly, they're a lovely company, and they will really help you to understand. So being really mindful of what you're paying for your goods. It sounds really obvious, but if it fluctuates wildly, you're going to get caught out, and it's going to really impact your bottom line. So you have to really be involved in what the currency market is doing. I mean, it's all about relationships. I mean, I say this all the time. People do business with people. So really invest in the relationships of the people that you're sourcing with. So have regular communication. We had regular communication with all of our suppliers. It's really important. We did what was called performance reviews. So always review what's gone well, and what we actually did, John Lewis, and this took some time as well, we were very good at reviewing our suppliers. We weren't quite as good at letting them review us. So actually we added, when I was in the sourcing and commercial team, we added in a whole piece of work where we would work with long-term suppliers, and we would review what worked for them and what wasn't working for them. So sometimes they would feed back to us quite rightly and say, the brief wasn't clear enough. So if you don't have a clear brief, it will cost you money because you haven't given real clarity to your suppliers. And they'd say that, you've given us criticism about the product not being right, but your brief wasn't very good and you're actually not very good at briefing. And as a big company, we're like, whoa, that's interesting. But actually that was a big learn for us because it did cost us money. So by the time the red seal, which is the first seal, came through, the product looked like nothing we were expecting because we hadn't been clear about what we wanted. So working with suppliers and actually having a performance review that has continuous improvement built into it is really, really critical. And having open relationships and long-term partnerships. So a blend of long-term partnerships with suppliers means that when things are tough, so when COVID hit, we rang every single supplier that we knew we were going to have to delay product. We said we won't never take it, but can you either lose it or we'll come back and take it at a later stage. And that is because we had built very strong relationships with our supply base. And if the supplier couldn't, we would buy the grade of the fabric and hold it. Particularly in fashion, we didn't want it printed. So we say, stop printing and we'll hold the fabric and we will come back. So we'll hold our business with you. And now that I'm out consulting, I've learned that we were one of the very few businesses who actually bothered to communicate and phone and talk to our suppliers. And that was about building a long-term relationship. So when things pick up, who do the suppliers work with? They come back and they work with you. So it's all about the people relationship and the management. And if you're a small supplier starting out, build those relationships. Ask people for help. Ask anyone you know for help. People love to help. People love to tell you how to do things. So don't ever be afraid of actually not knowing something. And I've spent a long time in the last 6 months working with a client who just was new to retail and said, I don't know any of this. I said, well, yeah, but I can tell you. And you need to ask people. Ask a supplier what you need because they will help you, because it is in their business for you to do good business. It's not in good business for them to let you fail. So build on your supplier relationships to help you, particularly when things are so volatile. Be upfront. And we would always say to suppliers, be really honest with us. So tell us when we've done something wrong. Tell us when we've made your life difficult. And that helps with the relationship. Tell us what we can do to help you do it better. And that's where a supplier scorecard or some way of assessing how you're working together is the most honest way to do business and the way that you can build the business. And I would always encourage you with your biggest suppliers to build a joint business plan. So sit down with your biggest supplier and say, okay, what has worked well? Where have we missed opportunities? How could we build our business together so that they're invested and you're invested? And we would do joint business plan with all our biggest suppliers and work out what we'd done wrong. And quite often there were things that we hadn't done and we hadn't communicated clearly, we hadn't briefed clearly, or we'd just been difficult. And I'd say, what do we do that makes your life difficult? And the supplier would kind of look at me like, am I allowed to tell you? And I'd say, tell me, I'm asking you. And they'd say, well, you make it really difficult because you do this. And we say, okay, we can help with that. Some things I might not be able to help because I have a warehouse who likes to charge you because you're late in your delivery and they'll do it anyway. But if you tell me that we haven't given you enough notice and the delivery's late for a reason, if you tell me in advance, I'll make sure the costs are waived. So the communication thing and the partnership thing is really, really critical. It's never as black and white as it needs to be. So continuous improvement, feedback loop. So as I say, create a feedback loop for your customers. Encourage innovation. And that's the one thing that I always find in joint business planning is where I would say, when I was new to home, because I came to home from fashion as head of buying, so I knew nothing about home as the head of buying. Quite useful for buyers because they know you don't know anything about product, which is great. So then you're strategic and let them get on with it. But it meant that I would meet all the suppliers and I would say to them, what did John Lewis do that makes your life difficult? How could we innovate with you? How could we improve? And they'd say, you never buy enough of the first season. You never buy enough, or you never ask us to produce this color. You always say, this is what you want. You don't listen to what we want. So it was a really, really useful feedback loop that we got and to build relationships. Encourage innovation, encourage benchmarking. So, again, having started on a quote, I'm going to finish on a quote. I don't know if anybody has ever read Shoe Dog. Has anyone read Shoe Dog? If you haven't, it's one of the best business books I've ever read, and I read lots of business books. Shoe Dog was written by Phil Knight, who is the founder of Nike. And it's a really honest book about everything he got wrong and how he could ever get into business because he made so many mistakes. It's an absolutely brilliant read. And one of the quotes from Phil Knight about sourcing is this one. It's hard enough to invent and manufacture and market a product. But then the logistics, the mechanics, the hydraulics of getting it to the people who want it, when they want it, that is how companies die and how ulcers are born. So it is really complex. It is really difficult. It's not good enough just to have a fabulous product and a great idea, because the mechanics of how you get it there and make profit are really, really critical in the success of your business. So visit shows like this, talk to people who know, look at trade websites, and make sure that you've done your scenario planning, that you've looked at what you're doing, and you're very well aware of what's going in the world that's going to have a direct impact on your business. And then you will have success and hopefully some fun along the way, because it's great dealing with suppliers from across the world. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate your attention. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them here. I am very friendly, don't bite. Or I'm happy to take them offline if no one wants to grab a mic. Any questions? I'm looking at you three. No. Oh, good. Well done. Mike is just coming.
In your experience with dealing with suppliers, what are some of the early warnings or red flags that you've probably seen that you could probably, I guess, learn from? Yeah.
I tell you, one of the key red flags for me personally is when they go quiet. So when you're talking to suppliers and you're getting lots of communication, then you start emailing suppliers and they stop responding, and you think, "Ooh, something is up here," and it can be a cultural thing as well. We worked with our Indian sourcing office, and they would say to us, "We're your sourcing office, so we're hiding all the problems from you." And I was like, no, I don't want you to do that. I want you to tell me early if there's a problem. I don't want you to try and fix it when I know at the last minute. So when you get delays and silence, it genuinely means something is wrong. So I always say to suppliers, please communicate with us frequently and early. If you've got a problem, tell us, because if you tell us early enough, we can fix it. So a red flag is generally for me when somebody goes quiet. And they sometimes do it with the best of intentions, but it's not great because it means it's left you no time to fix things. So I would always say silence is not great at that point, and communication is the thing that will really, really help drive it forward. Great question. One at the back there.
Hello. I am a second-generation owner of a traditional bricks and mortar shop, and it's always been traditional retail. We've always bought from wholesalers, and I'm just starting to buy directly from China and India and with our own range, which is very exciting, but I've never done it before.
Yeah, quite scary.
Yep. It's a lot of money, inevitably. As you mentioned, the taxes, customs, duties, shipping is a lot. Do you have any recommendations for where to learn about it rather than just flying blind?
Yeah, so I was mentioning Kalara. I would look at Kalara's website, so for an Indian company, and they're really fabulous company, really ethical, and they can do quite a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So I would look at websites, but I would also talk to your colleagues. There's lots of people who can help you. I mean, this show is a perfect example. So be really clear about what you want to source and where you're sourcing it. You do know that because you clearly know your market. The world is definitely smaller as well, so there are lots of opportunities as to where to source. Think about what you need from your product, what you need from all the things that I've said in terms of timeline. But I would get help from an agent or a company like a Kalara who can give you an insight. Certainly if you're looking in India and the Far East, they can really help you, but also get support from it, because you're going to be small, so you're not going to have your own sourcing company. But I would look for information everywhere. You can also on LinkedIn ask people, people will give you real advice. I was saying earlier that when I was always looking at suppliers and retailers. So if you look at companies like H&M and IKEA and even John Lewis, you can actually tell where they source their product. You can tell what factory it's out of, and it will give you information. And there's a new company I was talking about earlier called Fabacus, Fabacus, which is a company that puts QR codes onto every product. It's founded by a guy called Andrew Zaney, and every product in the world is going to have a QR. If you ever buy from Zara or Fashion Now, you'll see this QR codes. That will tell you what factory that comes from, what they specialize in, that they've got great sustainability. So it'll cut down the risk for you, and you'll know that if it's being sourced from companies, big companies like a Zara or a John Lewis or an IKEA, that they're the right places to go. But I would use the people around you to help. Hive and Source is a perfect example. They will really help tailor where you need to go. But also investigate someone like Clara. I think they could really help you. Fabacus, Fabacus, Fabacus. Andrew Zaney has founded it, and he's literally just, I think he was on LinkedIn last week, a couple of weeks ago, talking about the fact that he's doing it with Marks and Spencer's. So transparency and visibility is so critical now that everybody wants to know where products come from. So these QR codes will tell you where they come from, and they have an unbelievable amount of information. The other place to look is on those websites, actually, IKEA's website and H&M website. If you go into the sustainability part of their website, it teaches you lots about how to source and where to source. So there's lots of places to get information. Yeah.
It's just a quick one, but you mentioned a book there, Phil Knight. Is there any other strategy book that you recommend to read?
Any other what, sorry?
Strategy book, kind of similar to what you spoke about today, kind of.
Strategy for what? For sourcing particularly? Yeah.
Just business, just generally?
Yeah, I mean, I read lots of business books. There is a great one by Jim Collins. And I'm going to try and remember the name for you. It's a fantastic strategy book. And there's also a new book about CEO from Harvard Business Review. Has really great strategic chapters in it by different authors. And they produce one sort of every year. And it's really, really good. I use it quite a lot for like getting quotes and looking at presentations. But Jim Collins, anything by Jim Collins, anything by Simon Sinek. Think of Why, Ask Why is an absolutely amazing business book. I can't really recommend it higher. It tells you the why of your business is so important. And when you have your purpose and why set out, it understood, it makes all the decisions for you. So Simon Sinek is a brilliant writer. S-I-N-E-K, Simon Sinek. He does great speeches online as well. But anything by Jim Collins is absolutely brilliant. It's probably one of the best business books. If you look at first to last, he's done, I think, as well. But it's one of the most brilliant strategic books. And every chapter is really clear. And it talks about how you build your strategy, what are the critical things to do to have your strategy in shape, how you grow your business, how you decide to pivot, but done in language, which is, and he's a phenomenal businessman. So I would read everything, anything you can get online. Yeah.
Hi. So I run a business in Nigeria.
Right.
And my biggest challenge right now, even at this show, is looking at the price point. Our currency fluctuates so much. Mm-hmm. If you look at last year, December, we're about 1,000, let's say 1,002 naira to a pound.
Yeah.
Today we are 2,210 naira to a pound.
Wow.
And it keeps increasing. And an increase can be like 20, 30, 40 naira within a week.
Yeah.
So right now I'm so confused on how to source. I'm so confused on what my margins will be. I cannot charge in dollars or pounds. It has to be in the naira. If you hedge, before we will hedge for by 20 naira, 30 naira with the exchange rate. But now it's like, do I hedge by another 100, another 1,000?
It's really
so I am actually so confused.
So I think you need to get some advice, and I think you need to talk to Birchstone, the company I was telling you about who do FX currency, because I think you need to get some professional advice. And they're called Birchstone, Birchstone. I would just contact that. Because I think as buyers, we all said this at John Lewis, we don't want to be dealing with fluctuation currency. It's difficult enough to buy without having to deal with that as well. So I think you need to get some financial business advice as to how to do that. If you have to buy in that currency, because otherwise I would advise you to buy in a different currency. But if you're not able to do that, you're going to have to make some calls, and you're going to have to leave yourself some leeway to, if I hedge and I get it wrong, that I'm happy with it at this price, so finding a price that is right. But it's a really difficult one. So I would get professional advice. Birchstone, Birchstone, all one word. Okay? No, you're welcome. Tough one. We done? Oh, one more. Yep.
Did you ever write?
Sorry.
Did you ever write a book?
Did I ever write a book? Do you know, I've been thinking about it. I've always said I read lots of them, but I keep saying I'm going to write one. But I write lots of papers, but maybe I should write a book. If I was quieter, I would. But thank you. Yeah. It's on the list. Any other questions? Cool. I think we're done. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.